for me, I work on the human side of family enterprise. I'm not a therapist. I'm not a lawyer. I'm not a financial person. My role is to help families as organizations and their businesses as organizations guided by families understand the human interaction and communication that has to happen to ensure continuity and succession and governance. For me, the relevance of legitimacy has been profound because governance needs to be deemed, the structures have to be deemed as legitimate in order for them to work. The individuals who have to live by them have to understand them and deem them as legitimate in order to make them work. So there's a systemic and structural legitimacy that, by immersing myself in this, I have discovered has been really, really powerful with my clients, is to say, what is it about on the systemic level for succession and governance and practices that ensure continuity or at least support continuity and family flourishing? What is it about those practices that need to be seen as legitimate and not as mom or dad's next fluffy little investment in some consultant that comes along and just does it? But how do we create, with the engagement of everyone in the system, again, who's affected and affects the success, how do we engage them? And so I do work at the collective with legitimacy. Is our future legitimate? Do we have a shared definition of legitimacy around our future? Do we have a shared commitment around legitimacy of the design of succession planning, of the design of continuity planning, of the design of leadership in our governance and our structure, our advisory board or a board of trustees or directors that we have? And then for me also, it has had a tremendous relevancy to the individuals that I work with inside of the system. So my client is the whole family system, the whole ownership infrastructure and the whole family system. And so there may be a paying customer who sends me the money. They owe me for doing the work I do for them. But the client, the beneficiaries of my work, is the whole system. So I go from that collective down to the individuals, to the questions I ask them in my intake interviews. I assume we all do some form of an intake interview of the individuals who are going to affect and be affected by the work that we do. I have a whole section now of questions around this sense of legitimacy, because I get much quicker to the fact that I have a member in the system that is going to play the resistance game, right? Based on the type of question I ask them, based on, how do they see themselves belonging in the future of this, in the story today and of the future desired story. I ask them the same kind of question 3 different ways, because if they give me 3 different answers, I also know that they're looking for a way to tether themselves to some sort of mindset, that they aren't yet fully tethered. Because if they were fully tethered to their own sense of trust and their own sense of belief that they were legitimate in this story, in this system, then they'd answer the 3 different questions the same exact way. So I use my intake process differently because of this commitment to the relevance of legitimacy. I also, when I do family retreats to help them design, how do they want to navigate to their future? I also ask them questions about the strategic plan that they want to use to get there, to make sure that there's a sense of legitimacy given to the actions you all commit to. And we close out retreats, for those of you who are practitioners, we close out the retreats with the sort of the devil's advocate, or the let's take a look at all the things we said give us legitimacy and see if they truly are a sense for us, giving us that sense of legitimacy. So Russ, what about for you?
So I think in terms of, to take a point in terms of the client take on and being aware of the role legitimacy has. It's also worth checking in as we progress along that engagement with clients, because for many, the first time that they meet with a family business advisor is not something that you do necessarily on a weekly basis, but by building that trust as we do over time through working with families, to be able to check in against it and kind of understand that side of it as well as we go through, I think is important from an advisory perspective. I was thinking, going back to some of the kind of the fundamentals around it, is families are emotional systems, businesses are logical systems. And very often, I found this when I was in the financial planning world, the solutions that are created are very logical, and yet they're being presented into this emotional system. And if a sufficient focus hasn't been given on how legitimate individuals feel, how legitimate the family feels in making those decisions, that can sometimes be where resistance appears as well. Because although it makes perfect sense that this beautifully crafted trust structure or beautifully constructed ownership structure that manages to mitigate some tax and to save some challenges later on, if the individuals that are having to live within that plan are lacking their own sense of legitimacy, or collectively or individually, there's going to be some sticking around that decision. So I've spoken to many advisors who get their clients to a point where the advice is presented, but they're very reluctant to take that next step. The example I shared earlier of the rising gen, they'd spent years crafting this plan. It lacked legitimacy, and therefore it wasn't the plan that was implemented. It then got taken back and they had to work on it again. So I think as advisors, and again, we perhaps would say this, but we think it's essential for advisors to understand legitimacy and where it can be present, given that it's not an observable, measurable success factor that we see for other elements, but it's to really lean into an exploration around that with your clients.